In the dark chronicles of confraternity violence in Nigeria, certain names stand out, etched not just in memory but in fear. Among them, none looms larger than Gatuso, a member of the Black Axe confraternity who became more than a cultist. He became a phenomenon of terror. His reputation as the Vikings' worst nightmare was not earned overnight. It was forged through years of relentless executions, bloody confrontations, and a merciless campaign of violence that shook Anambra State and spilled across other regions of Nigeria. From his earliest days, the whispers surrounding Gatuso were not those of an ordinary recruit. Unlike many who joined confraternities seeking belonging, protection, or influence, Gatuso seemed destined to dominate. His presence commanded both respect and dread, and his fearlessness became his most lethal weapon. Stories about his exploits traveled from one university campus to another, until his name became synonymous with fear itself. For members of the Vikings confraternity, even the mere mention of his name was said to trigger unease. Many refused to speak it aloud, instead referring to him with coded language, as though invoking him directly might summon death. Within confraternity folklore, every era produces a figure who embodies the height of violence and brutality. In Anambra State, during the height of Black Axe Vikings rivalry, Gatuso was that figure. The origins of Gatuso's journey into the Black Axe confraternity remain clouded in secrecy, but research and survivor accounts suggest that he was drawn into the brotherhood during his youth in Anambra State. Like many young men at the time, confraternity life offered him not only protection but also a sense of identity in an environment where cult wars dictated campus and street survival. What set Gatuso apart was his unwavering boldness. While others hesitated, Gatuso embraced danger head-on. He quickly rose through the ranks by demonstrating loyalty to Black Axe, executing tasks that others feared. Initiations, operations, and retaliatory missions all bore witness to his courage and his appetite for violence. Anambra State universities and other higher institutions became the proving ground for his ruthlessness. Accounts from the early 2000s describe how rival Vikings members often vanished after confrontations in student environments where Gatuso operated. His notoriety spread from Nnamdi Azikiwe University to polytechnics and other institutions, where rumors of his exploits blurred into legend. By the time he was in his prime, Gatuso had already established himself as a key executioner. Unlike many confraternity members who specialized in intimidation or recruitment, his specialty was elimination. The statistics attributed to him, over 500 executed Vikings members, may sound exaggerated to outsiders, but within the cult world, numbers often carry symbolic weight. Whether literal or symbolic, this figure represented one truth: Gatuso's body count was unmatched. His reputation was not built solely on numbers but also on the audacity of his operations. Unlike others who operated in shadows, Gatuso executed missions in broad daylight, sometimes in public spaces where fear ensured that no witnesses would dare speak. His actions broke the traditional boundaries of cult violence and pushed the war between Black Axe and Vikings into new territory. Universities and other high institutions in Anambra State became the first battlegrounds where Gatuso's notoriety took root. In Nigeria, campuses have historically been centers of confraternity conflict, where rival groups fight for dominance over recruitment, territory, and influence. For Black Axe, the Vikings confraternity was their fiercest rival, and Gatuso became the ultimate weapon in this war. Eyewitnesses recount incidents where Gatuso's squad would storm hostels or lecture halls in search of identified Vikings members. Once targeted, escape was rare. His executions were often brutal, leaving behind scenes that etched fear deeply into the psyche of students. Over time, attendance at night lectures dwindled, and many students altered their daily routines to avoid the risk of being caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The executions also extended beyond campus walls. Vikings members who believed they were safe off campus soon discovered that Gatuso's reach was not confined by gates or security. From bars to streets, his executions followed targets into any environment. Anambra became a state where the rivalry was not an underground affair but a visible cycle of bloodletting that spilled into public life. Gattuso's operations destabilized campus life to such an extent that many institutions had to adjust academic calendars or suspend activities due to violent outbreaks. Authorities, often overwhelmed, found themselves powerless to stop him. The lack of decisive policing, coupled with the culture of silence, allowed him to continue unchecked. Yet, beyond the violence, what made Gattuso's story distinct was his fearlessness. Accounts consistently describe him as a man who never flinched in the face of danger. Armed confrontations with Vikings often ended with Gattuso advancing, not retreating. He inspired loyalty among fellow Black Axe members, who believed he possessed something beyond human strength, something spiritual that made him untouchable. Whispers grew that Gattuso had undergone powerful rituals that rendered him immune to bullets. Whether fact or myth, these beliefs fueled his aura. Even police officers, trained to approach criminals with force, hesitated when Gattuso's name surfaced. It was one thing to pursue an armed man. It was another to chase a figure believed to be spiritually fortified against untimely demise. Within the underworld of confraternity conflicts in Nigeria, numbers often become distorted by exaggeration and myth. Yet, in the case of Gattuso, even skeptics concede that the sheer scale of his violence was unparalleled. Eyewitness testimonies, police reports, and confraternity accounts all converge on one chilling consensus. Gattuso's execution record against Vikings members was staggering. The claim that he executed over 500 Vikings members across Anambra State and beyond may seem unbelievable. But researchers of cult violence note that such tallies often reflect cumulative years of sustained conflict, not one-time massacres. Each retaliatory cycle, each attack on campus or in the streets, added to the tally. Gattuso was at the center of this ongoing war, ensuring that his reputation spread like wildfire. Survivors of his attacks, though rare, described his precision and relentlessness. Unlike other Black Axe hitmen who executed tasks in small, isolated bursts, Gattuso organized systematic campaigns of elimination. He tracked rival leaders, identified their hideouts, and struck repeatedly. In one period of heightened conflict, entire groups of Vikings recruits disappeared, with whispers linking their fate to Gattuso's operations. Fear reshaped the Vikings' confraternities' behavior in Anambra. Meetings dwindled, recruitment slowed, and members relocated to other states where Gattuso's reach was less dominant. Yet even there his influence followed. Reports of executions attributed to him surfaced in Enugu, Edo, Imo, and Rivers states, suggesting that his campaign was not confined to Anambra. The phrase Vikings' worst nightmare was not a symbolic tag. It was a reality that lived in the minds of hundreds of young men. Rival members no longer viewed campus life as a safe space for growth but as a war zone where one man's shadow loomed over every decision. Gattuso's executions were not random, they were strategic. He sought not only revenge but domination. In the confraternity hierarchy, such dominance elevated him to near-mythical status. He became more than a soldier of Black Axe. He was a weapon in human form deployed to maintain supremacy. His executions carried a psychological impact that extended beyond the immediate demise. Each body left behind was a message. Resistance against Black Axe was futile. While Gattuso's primary reputation came from his role in confraternity conflicts, his name also surfaced in the murky waters of Anambra State politics. Politicians in Nigeria have historically been accused of exploiting cult groups for their own interests, as tools for intimidation, election manipulation, or outright elimination of rivals. Gattuso, with his notoriety and fear-inducing presence, was a perfect instrument for such exploitation. Reports from local sources linked him to the execution of prominent politicians and political associates in the state. In election seasons, violence often escalated, with rival camps resorting to the services of confraternity enforcers. In this climate, Gattuso's reputation made him a powerful ally. With his fearless approach and rumored spiritual protection, he became a mercenary whose loyalty could tilt political contests. Though difficult to verify in exact detail, accounts consistently suggest that several political executions bore his fingerprints. Unlike ordinary hitmen, Gattuso's presence ensured not only the elimination of a target but also the spread of fear across the political spectrum. Opponents withdrew candidacies, rallies were cancelled, and voter turnout was suppressed in areas where his influence was strongest. This relationship between politics and cult violence further entrenched Gattuso's impunity. Politicians who benefited from his services reportedly shielded him from law enforcement. Police efforts to arrest him often ended in sudden withdrawals or mysterious leaks of planned operations. Each failed attempt deepened the belief that Gattuso was untouchable, protected not only by his confraternity but also by the corridors of power. The intersection of politics and cultism meant that Gattuso's influence extended beyond the campuses and streets. His name became tied to broader struggles for control in Anambra. In the process, his notoriety transformed into something larger, a symbol of how deeply confraternities had penetrated Nigeria's socio-political fabric. Beyond confraternity executions and political executions, Gattuso was also implicated in armed robbery operations. Like many cult figures, the boundary between confraternity violence and organized crime was thin. With weapons, loyal followers, and fear as tools, robbery became both a means of survival and a show of power. Eyewitnesses and local reports linked Gattuso and his men to several high-profile robberies across Anambra. These operations were not petty thefts but large-scale heists involving transport companies and private businessmen. Victims often recalled that the attacks bore a unique mark: ruthless efficiency and merciless enforcement. Those who resisted were executed without hesitation. The robberies served multiple purposes. They generated funds for weapons, logistics, and confraternity activities. They reinforced Gattuso's aura of invincibility, as police investigations rarely led to his capture. And they blurred the lines between political violence, cult rivalry, and outright criminality. For the ordinary citizens of Anambra, Gattuso's name became a symbol of insecurity. To students he was a bandit. To politicians he was an enforcer. To traders and travelers, he was a robber whose presence meant loss and possible demise. By 2020, his reputation was so widespread that some referred to him as a man of many wars. He was fighting confraternity battles, serving political masters, and enriching himself through organized crime. Unlike others who specialized in one domain, Gattuso's influence spanned them all. And yet, his fearlessness remained the thread binding all these activities. Even in the face of heavy security crackdowns, he did not retreat. Each confrontation with law enforcement or rival groups only seemed to strengthen the legend that he was more than human. The stories of bullets bouncing off his body, whether myth or carefully orchestrated propaganda, cemented his identity as a man untouchable by ordinary means. Among all the legends that surrounded Gattuso, none was more enduring than the claim that bullets could not penetrate his body. This belief was not simply a boast whispered by fellow Black Axe members. It was a story carried by rivals, law enforcement officers, and ordinary citizens alike. The myth became a vital part of his identity, transforming him from a mere hitman into something closer to a supernatural force. In Nigeria, the idea of bulletproofing through spiritual fortification has deep cultural roots. Confraternities often conduct elaborate rituals, involving charms, incantations, and sacrifices, to protect members from harm. These rituals are believed to give the wearer mystical resilience against gunfire and machete attacks. Gattuso was said to have undergone some of the most powerful fortifications available, sourced from traditional priests in Anambra's remote villages. Eyewitness accounts reinforced the myth. In confrontations where heavy gunfire erupted, Gattuso reportedly walked away unscathed. Rivals swore that they had aimed directly at him, only to see him advance as though bullets were raindrops. Even in situations where others around him were struck down, he seemed untouchable. Whether these stories were literal truth or amplified propaganda did not matter. What mattered was the psychological effect. For Vikings members, the belief that Gattuso could not be executed made him a terrifying opponent. Battles that should have been even contests became lopsided, as fear paralyzed his enemies before shots were even fired. Among his followers, this aura of invincibility inspired loyalty. Members believed they were led by a man shielded by forces beyond human understanding. Such belief strengthened their willingness to follow him into dangerous missions. confident that his spiritual armor extended some measure of protection to them. For law enforcement, the myth complicated their task. Police officers already facing underfunded operations and poor equipment were reluctant to confront a man reputed to be immune to bullets. In a country where fear of spiritual powers often overrides professional duty, the legend of Gattuso's invincibility provided him with a shield as effective as any physical armor. This myth-making was not accidental. Gattuso himself cultivated the image, allowing stories of his resilience to circulate unchecked. Each failed attempt on his life reinforced the legend, until he became a living example of how belief itself can be a weapon in psychological warfare. No matter how untouchable he seemed, Gattuso's relentless campaign against Vikings members made him the prime target of their vengeance. Across Anambra and neighboring states, Vikings leadership issued direct orders to eliminate him. Dozens of assassination attempts were carried out, but each one ended in failure. One of the earliest recorded attempts involved an ambush outside a university campus in Anambra. Intelligence suggested that Gattuso would be traveling with only a few associates. A squad of armed Vikings laid in wait, determined to end his reign. The ambush turned chaotic when Gattuso reportedly charged forward instead of retreating, scattering his attackers. By the time the dust settled, several Vikings were perished, and Gattuso had once again walked away unharmed. Another attempt occurred in Enugu, where a coordinated strike was planned using insiders to track his movements. Yet, as was often the case, information leaked. By the time the Vikings moved in, Gattuso had vanished, leaving them to strike an empty target. This pattern repeated itself so frequently that whispers of inside betrayal circulated within Vikings' ranks, sowing suspicion and division. Over the years, Vikings leaders increased the scale of their operations. They deployed larger teams, equipped with heavier weapons, and even recruited members from other states. Still, the outcome was the same. Gattuso's ability to anticipate and escape traps added to his aura of invulnerability. It was as if he was always one step ahead, always aware of his enemy's plans. Some attributed this to his intelligence and well-placed informants within the Vikings' network. Others leaned on the supernatural explanation, claiming that his spiritual fortifications granted him foresight. Whatever the truth, the repeated failures left the Vikings demoralized. Members began to question whether Gattuso could ever be stopped, or whether attempting to execute him was itself a terminal sentence. The cycle of vengeance only deepened the violence. Each failed attempt on his life was answered with a new wave of executions, pushing the death toll higher. The war ceased to be about dominance alone. It became personal. For Gattuso, eliminating Vikings was not only duty but proof that no force, human or spiritual, could bring him down. While the Vikings pursued vengeance, law enforcement agencies in Anambra and across Nigeria also intensified their efforts to capture Gattuso. His name appeared on multiple wanted lists, circulated through police stations and checkpoints. Yet, just like his confraternity enemies, the police found him impossible to pin down. Initial attempts to arrest him often ended in conflict. Police squads dispatched to suspected hideouts were chased away instead. In several instances, operations were compromised before they even began, suggesting leaks from within the force. The possibility of corruption could not be ignored. Some officers, either sympathetic to black acts or intimidated by Gattuso's reputation, provided him with information. At other times, operations were cancelled without explanation. Political interference loomed large as powerful figures allegedly shielded him to protect their own interests. In one case, a heavily armed squad prepared to raid a compound where Gattuso was rumored to be hiding. Hours before the operation, orders came from above to stand down. By the next day he was gone. The frustration within the police force was palpable. Officers spoke anonymously about their fear of confronting a man believed to be bulletproof. Others admitted that even if they captured him, they doubted the system's ability to keep him detained. Nigeria's history of jailbreaks, weak prosecutions, and political influence meant that high-profile cultists often returned to the streets within months. Despite these challenges, the police persisted in naming Gattuso as one of the most wanted criminals in Anambra. His file included charges of homicide, armed robbery, political assassination and cult violence. His photographs circulated on posters, though few dared to display them publicly. To ordinary citizens, openly acknowledging him as a wanted man was dangerous. Silence was safer. Each failed attempt to capture him reinforced his legend. For some, the inability of law enforcement to bring him down was proof of his spiritual protection. For others, it was evidence of a compromised system where money and influence outweighed justice. Whatever the explanation, the result was the same. Gattuso remained free, operating in plain sight while the police struggled in the shadows. To understand why Gattuso remained at large for so long, one must examine how he mastered the art of invisibility. Despite his violent reputation and constant media whispers, he lived like a ghost, appearing and disappearing at will. Unlike many confraternity leaders who flaunted their wealth and status, Gattuso avoided excess visibility. He did not maintain a public persona that could be tracked. Instead, he lived in constant motion. He shifted from one safe house to another, often in rural communities where law enforcement presence was thin and loyalty to outsiders was minimal. Informants played a crucial role in his survival. Sources within confraternity circles and even in law enforcement leaked information that helped him evade capture. Whenever a raid was planned, word seemed to reach him in time. Police reports consistently noted that Gattuso slipped away minutes before their arrival, as though tipped off by an invisible hand. His movements were also unpredictable. He avoided routines, never spending too long in one location. Rumors placed him in Togo one week, Lagos the next, and Ghana shortly after. Sometimes, multiple sightings in different places suggested deliberate disinformation, a tactic that kept his enemies guessing. Another factor was community silence. In regions where he operated, fear silenced potential whistleblowers. Residents who might have provided tips to police chose not to, afraid of reprisals. To speak against Gattuso was to risk sudden execution, and in communities already scarred by violence, survival meant keeping quiet. This ability to vanish into the fabric of local society turned him into more than just a criminal. He became a phantom presence. People knew he existed, people knew he was near, but few could prove it. His absence in public life only deepened the mystery. The less he was seen, the more the legend grew. In this way, Gattuso's life mirrored the paradox of Nigerian cultism itself. Hypervisible in acts of violence, yet invisible when accountability came calling. Despite his ability to live in the shadows, several reported sightings of Gattuso between the late 2022 and early 2023 offered glimpses into his continued presence in Nigeria. These accounts, pieced together through interviews, police files, and confraternity narratives, illustrate both the reach of his activities and the desperation of those hunting him. One significant sighting occurred in Edo, during a bloody clash between Black Axe and Vikings members. Eyewitnesses described a man resembling Gattuso leading the charge, wielding weapons with ruthless efficiency. Though his face was partially concealed, survivors later claimed that his voice and mannerisms betrayed his identity. That clash ended with multiple Vikings executions and renewed fear that Gattuso was still directing Black Axe's deadliest missions. Another account placed him in Lagos, where he was allegedly spotted at a gathering connected to a local politician. Though photographs never surfaced, whispers spread quickly that he was being used once again as a political enforcer during election season. His presence in such a context reinforced the long-standing belief that he was too valuable to certain power brokers to ever be fully exposed. By 2023, his sightings became less frequent, and rumors of his impending departure from Nigeria began to spread. Some suggested that increased police pressure made it harder for him to operate. Others claimed that Black Axe leadership encouraged him to relocate, fearing that his notoriety was drawing too much attention. Still, each sighting left behind the same impression: a man who remained untouchable. Despite being the most wanted Black Axe member in Anambra, despite years of executions and robberies, he continued to move freely. His last documented activities in Nigeria were marked by both violence and whispers of an impending escape. Then, almost without warning, Gattuso disappeared. Information filtered through confraternity channels and whispered across Anambra. Gattuso had left Nigeria. Where exactly he went remains uncertain. Some reports placed him in neighboring West African countries, possibly Ghana or Benin Republic, where confraternity networks are also active. Others suggested he moved to abroad. The truth remains shrouded in mystery, but one fact was consistent. Gattuso vanished from the Nigerian landscape where his name had long haunted campuses and streets. His disappearance sparked speculation. Was he fleeing mounting police pressure? Was he ordered abroad by Black Axe leaders to expand their influence internationally? Or was he simply tired of years spent in constant warfare, seeking anonymity in foreign lands? For the Vikings confraternity, his departure was both a relief and an insult. On the one hand, their nightmare had seemingly ended. On the other, they had failed to achieve their goal of executing him. The police, too, faced embarrassment. After years of declaring him wanted, he had slipped out of the country beyond their jurisdiction. Yet, even in exile, Gattuso's name retained its potency. For those who remained in Anambra, the memory of his reign lingered. Younger confraternity members invoked his name as a symbol of fearlessness. Rumors that he might return one day kept rivals uneasy. The absence of clear evidence about his new location only deepened the mystery. Stories circulated of sightings abroad, but none were confirmed. Some claimed he was living quietly, avoiding attention, while others insisted he continued his violent lifestyle in new territories. Whatever the case, his departure did not erase his legacy. If anything, it cemented it, leaving behind a legend that could not be confined by borders. In the end, Gattuso's exile turned him from a local warlord into a figure of international myth within confraternity circles. His name was no longer tied only to Anambra State but to the broader narrative of Black Axe's reach across borders. In the years following his disappearance, the legend of Gattuso only grew stronger. Legends, after all, are not weakened by absence, they are nourished by it. His departure left a void that could be filled only with stories. Stories of his fearlessness, his violence, and his supposed invincibility. 4 younger confraternity members, especially those entering Black Axe in the mid-2020s and beyond, Gattuso's name became a rallying symbol. During initiations, older members told recruits about his exploits, framing him as the ultimate example of loyalty and ruthlessness. His reputation became part of the identity of Black Axe in Anambra. Proof that their brotherhood had once produced a man who humbled the Vikings to unprecedented levels. Among Vikings, the legend carried the opposite effect. His name was spoken sparingly, usually in hushed tones. Even in his absence, he remained a psychological weapon. New recruits were warned about the horrors of facing him, ensuring that fear of Gattuso was passed down through generations. This intergenerational fear gave him a strange kind of immortality. The spiritual myths also persisted. Stories of bullets bouncing off his skin, of charms that rendered him untouchable, continued to circulate. These tales reinforced Nigeria's cultural intersections of crime, spirituality, and belief. In communities where mystical protection is considered as real as physical armor, Gattuso was remembered not just as a man, but as someone who had transcended ordinary limits. To the public, Gattuso's legend was a reminder of how deeply confraternity violence had scarred Anambra. Parents warned their children to stay clear of cult activities, often citing his name as an example of how far one could go, and how dangerous the consequences could be. His name became shorthand for terror, invoked in conversations about crime, insecurity, and the failures of law enforcement. To understand Gattuso's impact fully, one must examine the wider consequences of his reign. His actions were not isolated incidents of conflict. They were part of a chain reaction that destabilized Anambra and beyond. On university campuses, his campaigns against Vikings reshaped student life. Fear of violence disrupted education. Attendance at lectures plummeted whenever rumors of a clash circulated. Hostels emptied out after dark. Social gatherings required heavy security, and even then clashes sometimes erupted. Anambra's academic institutions became zones of anxiety, with students caught between pursuit of education and survival in a climate of violence. Beyond campuses, Gattuso's entanglement with politics contributed to the erosion of democratic processes in the state. Elections became contests of intimidation rather than free choice. Communities lived under the shadow of conflict, knowing that their votes might be silenced by forces beyond their control. The collusion between politicians and cult figures like Gattuso revealed the fragile boundary between governance and criminality. His involvement in armed robbery further destabilized public life. Ordinary citizens, already grappling with poverty and insecurity, faced the added threat of violent crime. Transport businesses altered their routes, traders closed early, and rural roads became feared at night. The economy suffered subtle but real consequences as people adjusted daily life to minimize the risk of encountering men like him. Perhaps most significant was the collapse of trust in law enforcement. Each failed attempt to capture him, each leaked operation, each whispered rumor of political interference reinforced the perception that justice was unattainable. For many, Gattuso's freedom symbolized the inability of the Nigerian state to protect its citizens or enforce the rule of law. By the time he left Nigeria, his impact was irreversible. The force he unleashed and the systems he exposed left scars that could not be easily healed. Gattuso was not just a criminal figure. He was a force that revealed the fragility of institutions meant to uphold order. Today, the story of Gattuso remains unfinished. His exact whereabouts are unknown. Some claim he lives quietly abroad, blending into the anonymity of diaspora life. Others insist that he continues to operate within confraternity circles outside Nigeria, extending Black Axe's influence into new territories. With no verifiable evidence, his fate is left to speculation. What is certain, however, is that his legacy endures. In Anambra, his name continues to echo in conversations about cultism, politics, and insecurity. For Vikings members, he remains the archetype of a relentless enemy, one who could not be executed, could not be captured, and could not be forgotten. For Black Axe, he is remembered as a symbol of dominance, a man whose fearlessness defined an era. For researchers, his story illustrates the complex intersection of crime, politics, and spirituality in Nigeria. It demonstrates how individuals can rise from the margins to become central figures in systems of violence, exploiting weaknesses in governance and law enforcement. It also shows how myth and reality intertwine, making it difficult to separate fact from legend in the world of confraternities. For the public, Gattuso is both a warning and a mystery. A warning of how deeply cultism can infiltrate society, destabilizing education, politics, and security. A mystery because his story has no clear end, no arrest, no conviction, no grave. He vanished, leaving behind a vacuum filled with questions. And so the nightmare continues. Not because Gattuso still roams the streets of Anambra, but because his legend still shapes the fears, choices, and narratives of those who live in the shadow of cult conflict. His absence has not erased him, it has immortalized him. In the chronicles of Nigerian cultism, few figures have ever inspired such enduring fear and fascination. Gattuso remains the embodiment of both the power and the peril of confraternity violence. A man whose story may never truly end, because legends like his live on in whispers, fears, and the haunted memories of those who survived his era. Tell us what you think about Gattuso. Do you think he will return to Nigeria?